either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And we've come to our good senses to have chosen something quite sensible for a change.
You can't tell by the atrocious interpretation of English accents. We're talking about Sense and Sensibility.
Yeah, we figured since normally we do an anti-romance movie and we got an episode between Chris, or between our last block and now, might as well do something. So yeah, we're doing 1995's adaptation of Sensibility.
Thank you, because the 2008 one, while a good movie and a good time, is nothing compared to this version, and I will die on that hill.
I couldn't have given much of a care, and I watched only this one.
It's okay.
But Sense and Sensibility is based on the novel by Jane Austen with screenplay by Emma Thompson.
Oh, yes.
It's directed by Ong Lee.
Yep.
And starring Emma Thompson as Eleanor Dashwood, Kate Winslet as Marianne Dashwood, Alan Rickman as Colonel Brandon.
Amazing.
And Hugh Grant as Edward Ferrars, which is the second Hugh Grant movie we've covered, or second movie with Hugh Grant in it in this season. And
I would like to remind my husband that he has, in fact, watched movies with Hugh Grant in them. Multiple times.
Yeah, he watched Paddington with us.
And he told me to my face that didn't count.
What the fuck is he talking about?
I don't know.
Has he's seen Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, he has. And again, he looked at, granted, I went, oh, look, a young Hugh Grant. Isn't that fun? Because most of the movies that he has seen with Hugh Grant, it is a much more recent version of Hugh Grant. Oh. And I went, a young Hugh Grant. How fun is that? And he goes, I've never seen that man before in my life.
I should torture him with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
You should! You should! Because here's the thing. And then I pulled up a picture. I was like, oh, well, maybe it's the age that's messing you up a little bit. Because I do think Hugh Grant looks a little different as a young man, especially in period clothing, compared to more normal.
Yeah.
So I pull up a picture and his IMDb page, and my husband had the gall to look me in the eyes and go, nope, never seen a movie with Hugh Grant in it.
Lying bastard.
And I went, well, now you've watched his best one, so... Depending on who you are.
Yeah. But for those who don't know, Sense and Sensibility follows a pair of sisters and their mom.
And their younger daughter.
Yeah.
Or sister, sorry. Sister.
It's mainly two sisters struggling in love and being able to live in the upper crust of the 18th century.
True, but also so much more.
Yeah, one thing that surprised me with this movie is the director, Lee, also directed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yes, he was not everyone's original idea of the perfect director, but he ended up being the perfect director.
Yeah, they mentioned it was difficult to find someone who would focus on the family, and Lee was the one that they're like, okay, this is the perfect one. Which, by the way, our sources for today's episode include commentary by Emma Thompson and producer Lindsay Doran, commentary by Ong Lee, and producer James Seamus, which I do think is an interesting way to do the commentary of splitting up the female producers and the male producers to get their two different viewpoints.
Yes, very interesting. Also several interviews with Alan Rickman, who talked extensively about his time working on this, as well as Emma Thompson. She also has several interviews where she talks extensively about this all throughout her career. And then also I have read the original book, and occasionally I will compare it to the 2008, even though you didn't see it, to make a point of how good this one is.
Okay. And I, on the other hand, I have never read a Jane Austen novel. I've tried so hard to listen to the audiobook. I got like an hour into it and I'm like, I can't fucking do this anymore. It's just so gossipy and
it is. And this is literally the reason Ang Lee was picked as the director.
Okay.
Because I very firmly stand by the fact that a lot of the narrators that read the books to you completely miss the humor that is Austen's work. She wrote very cynically, she had a lot of, humor to her writing, and a lot of the problems with it is, people try and put on, essentially, an Emma Thompson accent to read the book to you, which, don't get me wrong, she sounds great. It does make it hard to follow along for something like this, because she writes very densely. So, a huge part of the reason why Lee was picked was because, he was not familiar with her works whatsoever. They didn't have, he wasn't going to hold her to this, high regard that English society holds Austen's works, which don't get me wrong. I think it's very reasonable that they hold her, like, there's a reason she's a classical writer.
Oh yeah, I mean, despite not having read any of her stuff, I know her importance and her place in history as the social commentary on women's roles in society.
Yes. It's a lot to get through.
Yeah.
It's a lot like telling people to go in completely dry to Lord of the Rings and not know and you not like tell them anything about like how to like properly read it. It's a lot. It's a lot to read.
I would rather read textbooks.
Some people do.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And I totally get it. And that is part of the reason why Lee was picked too, was for his work on Wedding Banquet, where he proved that he could show both a humor but a serious romance as opposed to a rom-com. Mm-hmm. And so they thought, well, okay, this is our guy. He doesn't know Austen's works very well. In fact, he had to read the book to like feel comfortable doing this.
Okay.
Also, his directorial style, because he's a Taiwanese director, is much more straight and strict than the English actors were all used to, which ended up working really well, because his rigor kind of forced them into roles that they thought they were going to kind of, like, wishy-washy their way through, like, really romance up. And he was like, no, that's not how she wrote it.
So, kept it true to form.
He kept it very true to form. This was also one of the only versions where, like, the amount of effort to detail, which is part of the reason why, for me, this is the superior form. His willingness to let people who were good at the details, like, be good at the details, that's what makes this movie.
Yeah, it's like, who are you just talking about who let the director, or let the people do what they did? I can't remember.
I can't either, but it's a sign of a good movie, usually. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's why, despite I know Pride and Prejudice being most people's, like, number one pick for an Austen work, and honestly having the most versions of it, I know a lot of people's pick is Emma, which Emma was a close runner-up. When Emma Thompson was, like, brought up, like, hey, we should do something. She was like, what about Emma? And they were like, no. Sense and Sensibility is where it's at.
Backshot Cool World, that's what I was thinking of, who just let the people who knew what they were supposed to know what they were doing do what their job was.
Yeah, and a classic. It's proven to work.
Yeah. And, I mean, granted, like I said, I don't know much about her. I just know that this is her first movie. Or first novel. Mm-hmm. She also did Pride and Prejudice and Emma, and I've not seen any of those other adaptations, even including Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies.
We will eventually get to Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, because I do think now, especially now that you have seen a very good adaptation with Sense and Sensibilities, the humor in Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies will be even funnier. Because knowing the duality really makes that one the best.
Yeah, we'll see.
Because I read both Pride and Prejudice and Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, and let me tell you, there's whole passages that are literally word for word, and then "and zombies busted down the door" is added to the end of a Jane Austen work.
Amazing.
Mwah, beautiful.
But, Chris, before we get into it, what are we drinking today?
Today we have a little bit of brandy to pick up our spirits on this cold evening.
A spice brandy, if I do dare say.
Yes, very nice.
Cheers.
Cheers. Surprisingly good. I see why the old-timey people drank the hell out of this shit.
Ooh. That'd be fucking good, Warm. I was gonna do a British accent, but goddamn, that's actually pretty good.
That's very good. I thought I maybe poured a little heavy. Now I regret how little I poured into my cup.
Yeah. Sense and Sensibility.
Yes.
Simple and clean credits, title card to start it off. I think that's a great way to start this one. I know.
No, I really like it.
Yeah, sometimes it can get boring, but some might say this would be a sensible start.
See, okay. Each time something happens here, I'm like, this is really the driest way to approach this movie. And every time it's the correct answer.
Well, there's something classic about it, I think, with, like, because I'm currently going through a bunch of old Universal movies, and that's how a lot of them start, is either some artwork and then the title cards, or it's just the title card or title credit. So it's just very simple.
And I think a lot of people, and myself included, the reason that this version and this movie, out of all of the, like, romantic drama period pieces, this is the reason I come back to this one, is because of how simple and clean this storytelling is, and from the get-go, it feels almost like you're being immediately transported back to a much more strict and a much more simple time. And this really, like, from the get-go, you are not left with any questions of what kind of movie you're about to watch. Oh
yeah, no, because it starts off with a dying father who can't split the land between his families, which, I mean, sets up the first emotional beat where it's supposed to be this sad thing, but, you know, the dad's dying and he can't take care of the people he loves, so he's trusting his son to do it.
Yeah.
And it's also gets that little bit of comedy from the get-go where the son's like, yes, I'll do it. Like, you'll give them £500 a year and just you'll make sure that they want for nothing.
Yes.
And then it immediately starts into the commentary and the little bit of comedy with his wife talking him down from only give them £500 a year. Or no, he's originally wants to give them £3,000 just to be good to them, so that way they don't have to want for more. And then his wife talks him down to $100 a year, then to $20 here and there, and then really we're getting $500 should be good enough for a life for them to go on.
Now, would you like to know what that money actually translates to?
I did the 500, which is about £8,931 today.
Ish.
Yeah.
Some calculators put it even lower, close to 70,000, which in American dollars translates to 90,000.
Oh, the
£500 translates to 73,000-ish.
I got 8,000.
Again, some calculators, the inflation's crazy.
Okay.
But then you have to translate pounds to dollars, and that's roughly $90,000, which, granted, to those of us working in the middle of the worst economy, sounds like not too bad, but you have to remember that A, these are upper crust women, B, there are 4 people to live completely off of this salary for a whole year.
And 2 servants.
They pare down to 2 servants.
Yes.
Which, for upper crusty people, that's nothing. That's almost no servants.
Okay, so one thing as well, they made them richer in the movie make the downfall harder from what the novelization was.
They sure did, and I actually am all for it, because the drastic change in their lifestyle doesn't sound so bad, especially when you read it, because to a lot of us, especially if you're not like a history buff, it doesn't sound too bad. Like, oh, you still have 2 servants and you have your own house. That's not that bad. But then you have to, really, rework it in your head of, how many people are living off of this, what sort of life that they are both used to, and can then, continue. None of them can actually get real jobs, right? They still have one who's school age, so she needs to go and finish off her schooling of some kind, if she wants to be a proper lady. They have to pay for that. It's usually a boarding school situation, or a governess or a tutor. Now, the sisters are teaching her. So, she's, her schooling's done. She's not going to ever be in proper society. The mother this is her dead retirement age. She cannot hope to escape this. Nope. The most she can hope for is all her children leave.
Yeah.
That's literally all she can hope for.
And get married. That's why the mom's so okay with it, wanting them to get married.
The other big thing that they changed, and granted, I know that they changed, truthfully, quite a lot if you are wanting to be nitpicky between the book and the movie. I feel like they had to. The book is very long. The other big thing they changed was they were much more flexible, especially Emma Thompson was much more flexible with how old everyone was to better have, some understanding. So, our oldest daughter in the book is only 19, which doesn't sound too bad, unless you realize that, she should have been married by now, because 21 was considered unmarriable.
Yeah, what did I learn? I learned in Japan, women over 25 are considered leftover cake.
Yes, and granted, it's not as direct a symbolism in English society at this time period, but it's pretty damn close.
Yeah.
You were hoping to marry a very old dude who, didn't care anymore at that age.
I mean, how society shifted as well. Most of us are, or not most of us, but a fair chunk of us are getting married in our late 20s, early 30s. So, we're it's a completely different time, because this is what's set in, the 1700s. So, it's a very, very different time frame.
Yeah. The other thing to remember is, especially if you have no money as a woman, you would have been, sold off, essentially. And that's what the dowry's for, is, please take her. Look how nice. We can pay you.
Yeah, that's one thing that when we do get introduced to the family proper, that they bring up is she's like, well, now I have no dowry to give my daughters.
Which is a huge bummer, especially since, as the very first scene announces, we only hand down stuff to sons. Girls are essentially property still at this time period. They don't get anything.
Yeah.
And so they raise the characters' ages, mostly Emma Thompson's, up to somewhere around 30, because then it's much more reasonable to understand why she doesn't feel like marrying for love is really that important. Because to her, the clock is over. Her time is done. She might as well just lay down and die on the road, because why marry for love when she could just have any marriage and be done with it?
Yeah, well, I think it sets up the importance of the romance much later, where it's more about being married for love instead of being married for their money. Even though
Yes.
that is a part of it for part of the movie.
It is.
But it sets up that expectation of these the hopelessness that they're not going to be selected because they don't have a dowry.
And the end goal of the movie sets up this idea of like, oh, you're gonna be on this adventure and you're gonna have to decide, is it better to marry for love or for position?
Mm-hmm.
And then in the end it answers it for you, like, clearly love, because this is a Jane Austen work and it's one of the greatest romantics of all time, right? But with that said, that weight, that heaviness, I think the way this movie handles it, and like, it's never super directly pointed, right? It's never like well, if we marry this guy, we're all well off. It's like, oh, he would be a great match. The way that this movie handles it, even from the very beginning, when they are all like, well, shit, now we have to sell our house, and we have to get rid of all the servants, and like, we don't even live here anymore, rah!
Yeah.
Like, the way that this is all handled so delicately and so in the background adds to that just little bit of weight in the back of your head, as opposed to being like forcefully told the whole story. Which I think is why this is, like, my favorite version of this.
Yeah, well, we're not even given time to rest while we're slowly being introduced to these characters, because the stepbrother's wife is only concerned of how quickly she can get them out of the house. And
she is such an ass, and I love that they portrayed her like this. Because in the book that takes a lot longer, she's still an ass, but, like, you have more time to be like, oh, well, she hasn't technically done anything wrong. In the movie, you're like, wow, what a dick.
Yeah, now we're into the audiobook, and they aren't even they're not even in the countryside. Like, they're just about to go there. And I'm like, I can't do another 16 hours of this shit.
I totally get it. I think this is why Lee's directing, with having her just really amp up, like, how much of a dick, where she, like, walks out and she's like, what a beautiful orchard. I'm gonna bulldoze all of it. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wow, okay, can't read a room. And also, maybe doesn't care.
Well, it's that nice silence awkward silence at dinner that really sets up, like, the tone for this whole first portion of the movie, because they also have their desires to leave, but they just financially can't until they find something that they can actually afford with the meager £500 a year.
The other thing that this scene, and especially this asshole of a character, helps establish very early on, is the hair and makeup department's absolute care in these characters. A lot of people point to a lot of Austen's works as great examples of period pieces because there's so much extra effort put into specifically clothing, which they did. We'll get to those. But the hair and makeup in this movie, I think, is on point like no other.
I just realized or remembered, there's a period piece part in Notting Hill as well.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
But, yeah, no, I mean, that's the one thing that they brought up, and don't get me wrong, I don't know that much about costuming, so...
I love it.
But it doesn't feel out of place. Like, I had to be told in the commentary that they had to make some creative choices, especially with the younger actors, to not give them wigs, so that way they could feel a little bit more close to us, rather than, like, everyone wearing wigs like they did back in the day.
And this is where I think the biggest distinction between the 2008 and this version differs, right? The 2008 is very stylized. It looks much more modern. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun. It's still a very good movie. But this one, the attention to detail all the way down to who was asked to sleep with their hair in pin curls, which is where you take your hair in little sections and roll it up at night, and then you put a pin in it, and you put a little bonnet on your head, and you go to bed. And that's how you get these little tight, ugly ringlets, right? Yeah,
Kate Winslet's character.
Yes.
I hated her hair this whole time. It's just like, I watch these movies, and I see some of this stuff, and it's like, the amount of bullshit women go through to try and have, like...
The men did it, too.
I know. The
men were arguably worse about it.
Maybe I'm just a lazy shit, but it's just
Me too.
I
haven't gotten my hair cut in months. I regularly just go to the bathroom with a pair of clippers and go to town. But no, I find it absolutely fascinating that the way that the costuming department handled it here, because this time period, the style that was popular was a romanticized version of Roman, which is why we have the weird ringlets, right? And that's why we have the weird dress. It was to, like, bring about this romantic idea of what the Romans were like. And it wasn't real Romans. It was, like, the architecture that's left behind of the Romans, like this
It's the Victorian romanticization and rewriting of history bullshit.
It's exactly that. And so this, like, very fanciful version, And so you can see at the dinner table already, without even having to do the costume change, because we haven't gotten there yet, where who wears their hair how kind of dictates what kind of character they're going to be. You can see that the more romantic and, like, fun and out there sister, she has her hair done correctly, but it's a little bit more free. There's a lot more hair happening. The sister, who's much more reserved, much more sensible, she has her hair done correctly, but it's all perfectly placed. And our asshole friend here, who's over here like, I'm gonna demo the whole left wing and add in my own aviary, her hair is immaculately done, but at the same time off-putting, because it doesn't feel like she's, like, done anything with the day to mess it up. Her ringlets are immaculate. It's
a more subtle way of portraying character status or position compared to, like, or personalities compared to, like, say, the old Italian theater with the longer the nose, the more comedic the character, or in anime where it's like, oh, this character's hair color is this is how they're supposed to act, or their blood type determines what personality they have.
It's 100% that, and we will even see it once all the men characters come in. We can kind of start to see it with the, like, stepbrothers, right? Where he comes in and he's fairly well dressed, his hair is fairly well put together, but it's a little looser. It's not nearly as well kept as Crazy Pants Lady over here.
Because he's a free spirit.
That's why he's, like, the nicer one to hang around.
Yeah.
And, like, so you can immediately get a sense of who these characters are, which is great, because while Austen herself is a wordy person, bless her heart, the characters in this movie are fairly quiet. Like, we don't have a ton of dialogue for how long this movie is.
Oh, yeah. And before we move on to Mr. Ferris.
Oh, yes.
I do also appreciate the sets, because they thought they shot in real locations that were from the British Trust. And the amount of work they had to go through to even film is crazy.
It's staggering.
Because the only people who can move any of the furniture are people from the British Trust, and they mentioned that, like, most of them were, like, 70-year-old women, so...
The little ladies trying to scoot this giant pianoforte around.
Yeah, like a 300-pound piece of furniture, and they can't do anything. They're legally not allowed to.
Yep.
Everything had to be 3 foot from the edge of the room.
Yep.
So, like, there's all these, like, hoops they had to jump through, and how they were able still to film it in a stylistic way that didn't feel like super force of, like, here's a close-up, because we couldn't actually get a shot of the room.
The fact they were allowed to touch any of the furniture was honestly amazing. Granted, a lot of the, like, more lived-in spaces, there was some reproduction furniture that was brought in as opposed to letting them sit on the real stuff. But for the most part, like, what you see is what you get. Like, it's not like one of those, like, oh, half of this was shot, outside was shot in front of the lawn, and the inside was all shot on stage. Most of this was shot in a house. Yeah. A very old house. A very beautiful house. But a house.
Yeah, historical.
Yes, which is even crazier, because here, we would find that old house, and it'd be privately owned, and you'd have to work with the owner, and then it'd become kind of like the house from A Christmas Story, or Home Alone, where, like, it just shows up in, like, multiple iterations, and, like, eventually you're like, oh, that's just the Home Alone house again. Hello, Home Alone house. These manors have been around for so long, and honestly, we see so little of them, that you just kind of don't know where you are. You're just kind of in this, like, fantasy painting the whole time, in the best possible way.
Yeah, well, Lee mentioned that they were inspired from Dutch oil painters. I have the notes later on, but I can't remember exactly who their names were, because they're a little bit more outside of what I follow. So. Sure. But now cometh Edward Ferris,
our first love interest.
The very well done, awkwardly acted
so awkward.
Hugh Grant.
The hair on this man is unreal, because he's supposed to be this wild and, like, you know, heartthrob of a young man, the one who breaks your heart and then runs away with it, but then, like, truly he was a good guy. Yeah. Like, no one's truly the bad guy except for that asshole woman at the beginning.
Well, there's kind of a bad guy.
Yeah, kind of. Like, there's mistakes made.
Yeah. But I do appreciate with the sorrow everything, I mean, especially with establishing the personalities and how everyone's dealing with the death. The mom is sad, first daughter Eleanor is complacent, and the other one, Marianne, is angry, but the youngest is running away from it all. And on top of that, Edward is likable early on. Yeah. Because he's trying not to tread on their grieving family, whereas they were trying to get rid of the mom to go move into a different room, whereas he's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Like, what the movie, I get what, I 100% why it's Sense and Sensibility. Yeah. The people who succeed or find happiness in this movie are acting in sensible and sensitive and sensible manners instead of following the quote-unquote rules that they're supposed to follow as dictated by society.
Well, and also there is a more genteel code happening where, like, we are the upper crust. We are supposed to have this time and money for compassion. What good are we if we can't do the humanitarian work? Granted, the humanitarian work is for more upper crust people in this instance, but, like, this idea of, like, oh, we have time to let you, like, stay in your room a little longer. Like, I'm not in a hurry. We have a whole guest wing.
Yeah, and in the novel, he's just like, oh, by the way, we're, like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm not taking the house, or I'm not taking that room, and then that's the end of the scene. Because, like, that's the thing that Winslet said is, in writing it, it was very difficult to build on these subplots, because all the men run off to London.
Yeah, they sure do.
And also, Austen didn't write scenes of men alone, so, like, and also, like, their roles in the book are very simple. They feel like the stereotypical, I guess, because when Winslet talked about boy and girl films, and I'll get to it at the end, but one thing she brought up is, like, in boy movies, girls are either sex symbols or they're not, and the men are heroes or they're not, or they're the villains. And it's like, yeah, but, like, these characters, like, in the book, they're treated like, yeah, the sexy women in the movies that show up for, like, 10 seconds and then are gone.
And honestly, I think that's why so many, especially women, gravitate to not just Jane Austen's work, but also, like, the movies of these period drama pieces, because it is so women-centric. Like, we spend a lot of time invested in what they're wearing, what they're eating, what their hobbies are, essentially, even if we're not directly forced into it. And I think for a lot of audience members, like, that level of humanitizing your, like, entire female cast is very appealing. Because it also separates itself from more modern rom-coms where, like, sure, we might be following a female lead around the whole time. It might be her story about finding love in Christmas Town or wherever bullshit you want to set it. But usually, truthfully, she's a rather dry character with no, like, real... Like, we don't have time to get into, like, their dinner habits. Yeah. And even in a 2-hour movie, we managed to get into their dinner habits.
Well, and I think that's part of why, like, The Devil Wears Prada is so good, is because...
It stands above, for sure.
Yeah, and same with this, is because it is a very character-driven movie, and while the romance was on the back burner on The Devil Wears Prada, because it was the consequences of being career-driven and all that, this one, it fits its time period, because back then, what did women have? They had marriage and their books. Yeah,
and, you know, their hobby, which... Austen in her writing spends more time with these ladies' works of, like, what they were working on, whether most of the time I think in this one it was mostly, like, needlework, so embroidery or cross-stitching of some kind. Some lace work, I think, potentially even. But we see it in this movie. The other thing that I think makes this stand above and, like, really helps you sit in the time period and, like, really comprehend, like, why do we have time to care about all of this stuff? Why do all these characters have time to, like, worry about what their neighbor down the street is doing all the time? Is there's not a lot of music in this. There's not a lot of background stuff happening. You get kind of just the ambience of the room, so whatever shuffling or, like, plates clinking or if there's a fire going. And for the most part, that's it for this movie. And it helps really slow everything down for you to sit there and be like, wow, they really would just be sitting in that parlor with nothing happening.
Yeah.
They're just sitting there.
No, exactly. And getting back to Edward a little bit.
Yes.
Also, the reason he's such a likable character is not just he shows compassion to the family. He's also the first one that gets Margaret to get out.
Yes.
Because he takes a very soft approach. Yeah, he's smart in the approach, but he's also... he's doing it in a way that is charming for Eleanor and also pairs with her very nicely.
Yes.
And as they start to get talking, we learn he's a sensitive man wanting simplicity. And that's the thing with this movie, is even though they expand upon the male characters, we get them so defined in such a short amount of time, because while he's explaining all this, there's a very poignant line that I really like. You will inherit your fortune. We can't even earn ours, which
is a good line.
Really sets it.
It really does.
Also, this role was written specifically for Grant in 1992 before he was famous.
That makes perfect sense, though, because look at him.
Yeah.
He has a very good, like, charm to him. The way he holds himself throughout this movie is perfectly done. You really feel the, like, care that this character's supposed to have. The other thing, I want to go back just, like, a half a breath back to, like, he kind of just comes in to the movie, and you really don't know anything about him other than who he's related to. And then, like, he kind of sort of lets on a little bit of, like, oh, I have to go to London for business. And, like, he kind of, like, loosely says what he does with his gentleman free time and endless money.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't get a whole lot more. Like, we don't get a ton like we do with the ladies of the house. And I think it kind of works even better that way. Not just from, like, it gives more time for the female leads. But it also, once again, sets the time period again. Because you wouldn't have known, really, the guys very well unless they were your family members, because you can't be unescorted.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, maybe you would, like, know someone from childhood, but that's if you're kind of lucky. Well,
they also mentioned that in creating the realism of it, that most of the time when someone would come to stop by and visit, the expected time was like 15 minutes. Like, you don't go to someone's house and hang out for 2 hours back then.
No,
unless it's like a party or a picnic, it's a larger social event.
Yes, well, and you have to remember that the social standards of the time were really based around people in London, where you probably had 20, 40 people you needed to say hi to a day. Like, it was considered rude to not, like, essentially, quote unquote, text your friend and be like, what's up, peace, but, like, you had to do it in person.
Yeah.
They're in the countryside, so, like, now they just have to walk farther between houses. So they probably don't have as many people. And, like, they mentioned that a couple times where, like, oh, I like the peace of the countryside. It's so much less busy than London. And it's like, well, if you're homebodies, it's not busy. But I see why it would be annoying to constantly have people coming around.
When you have to wait all day to go to your buddy's house and you only have 15 minutes to tell him about the epic shit you took the morning before.
Yeah, essentially. Well, and it kind of helps, like, really solidify in your mind why they, later on, especially once we meet our more wealthy friends who start, like, taking them around places and kind of doting on them a little, why it's like, oh, we're gonna have a dinner party tomorrow. And why, like, that's not rude that they didn't say something, like, 2 weeks ago. It's because you have, nothing better to do, and, like, this is literally the only time you're going to socialize. If you want to socialize more than once a week, you have to more than one dinner party.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it makes sense for him to just show up, kind of whisk everyone off their feet, and then be like, bye, bitches, and, like, bail.
Yeah, and we quickly move on from this because Barton College is now, or cottage is open to them, which Edward and Eleanor's attachment, and Marianne also disapproving it because Edward is too docile, nicely setting up the difference between the sisters even further, and setting up Marianne's free-spiritedness, as well as setting up that their stepbrother's wife, who is the sister of Edward, disapproves of them altogether just because they're lower than them. They don't have...
Yeah.
They're of slightly lesser standings than herself now.
And at the beginning, when he's, like, showing this disapproval, you're like, wow, what a rude ass. They're not that much lower. And then we end up at the cottage.
Yeah.
And they didn't really bother to, like, update this cottage in any way to, like, make it movie ready. And it works because everything is dirty. The paint is still messed up because it's a historical landmark that hasn't been touched in who knows how long.
Yeah.
But it kind of works for the movie because these ladies aren't going to be the ones whitewashing the walls. Their singular butler can't do it. He's busy. They've got one maid, and she's busy. No one's going to be fixing or painting anything in this house.
Yeah. And quickly before they go off to Devonshire.
True.
Edward has that moment to speak with her, and the one thing that I like about this, too, is it's constantly building this romantic tension. Yes. And cutting everything short before they can reveal anything. And it's always because they have to go to London.
Yes.
Which I thought they were in London from the get-go. I didn't know that they weren't outside of London. He's like, I must go to London. It's like, where have we been this first 30 minutes of this movie?
Well, and this is the other thing you have to remember, is they are outside of London, but they're not that far outside of London, because on multiple occasions they're like, quick, my horse, and they take nothing with them. They're like, all right, gonna stink for however long I'm in this horse. That was the fun thing. I forced my husband to watch this. He fully thought he was going to get to play his little robot game on his computer while I watched the movie. And guess who was fully entranced?
Brian.
He was so entranced, which is great, because now I have a whole genre that we can splurge together. But every time the ladies, and this is the first scene, they all four of the ladies cram into the one carriage, right? And they have to ride, and, like, one of the other now owners of their previous home, mentions like, oh, it's not that far away, but it's far enough that we'll never have to see you again.
Yeah.
And I was like, Brian, remember, you have to sit shoulder to shoulder, stiff as a board, on that shitty piece of wood in that bumpy-ass carriage for hours.
But yeah, once we do get to Devonshire, it's I like that their relatives are so different in the countryside from the city folk.
They're hilarious. I love them. They're so over the top. They're too friendly. They're too much.
They're some of like the Midwesterners.
They're so Midwestern in the most British way possible, and I love it.
Yeah, but also like this is where we get like a real change in the camera work too, because in London it's very stiff, very straightforward. But now we get a lot more shots of the landscape, and I really like this camera work, which I guess was a lot of Lee's direction, because he also brought up how much he liked the English style countryside landscaping, while picturesque is also at the same time artificially arranged to feel natural, which I think is such a...
No, he's got it point on.
That's why I love English style landscaping, because of that, because it's like, you look at it and like, oh, that's really pretty and nice, that'd make a nice painting. Oh wait, that row of hedges is just a straight borderline between properties. Like,
I love how he sets this up where you're kind of like entranced by the beauty of the hills and the fields and like the dotted with these cute little sheep everywhere, and it's just their carriage rolling down this picturesque road, and then we get to their cottage, and like the cottage, by like a lot of modern standards, I think they did a great job. By modern standards, you'd be like, wow, what a fancy ass house. And then you kind of like take a second to look at it, and like the grass isn't very well kept, and like it's small.
Well,
it's a little dingy.
It's small because, well, it looks small because they did a very good job with the camera work.
They really did.
To hide the other half of the house that they were using.
I was going to say, in real life, it's a very nice house. But this is, like, they were very clever with also, like, making sure that, like, most of the scenes we see of the house are a little overcast, too. Everything looks a little bit damp and dingy. Nothing really looks like, it doesn't look warm and comfortable, like, oh, what a cute cottage in the hillside. It's like we're living here now.
It feels like a cold castle, basically.
It does, but it's immediately offset by their relatives who, like, bust in it with their 500 dogs, and they're like, family, welcome, we're so excited to have you. We only live, like, a half mile up the road. We're going to be over all the time. And you're like, oh, I don't know if I want that.
Yeah.
And then you immediately want that, because they're so sweet.
Well, and on top of that, so specifically the painters that were mentioned were Hammershaw and Vermeer.
Yes.
I did not spend time to look up any of them.
They are exactly the classical English countryside that you are imagining in your head. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you've seen English TV period dramas, or like any BBC show ever, you've seen works based off of their stuff.
I'm trying to think. I don't think this is a genre that is not exactly my forte, and I have barely done any dives into it. It's always just something I kind of stumble upon.
I think most audiences will have seen at least one BBC production, and their work is really heavily, like, both inspired by and then continued to inspire what the English countryside looks like.
Doctor Who's about the only thing I've seen that would probably be up there.
Yeah, there's some scenes that are pretty heavy, yeah.
But I do also appreciate that Lee, when he tried to, he always tried for a softer, more naturalistic approach, even in, like, the interior shots, using candles as much as possible, as well as Chinese lanterns, like, in the bedroom shots, to, like, have them off screen, but have that nice little soft light to everything.
And this is where the detail in that helps, too, because he chose to go with that sort of lighting. When we do see the characters, like, up in bed at night with their little candlelight trying to, like, do something like needlework or read, they have to, like, get so close to the candle because they can't see. And I think it's an easy mistake actors make a lot of the times in period dramas, where, like, the details matter. So, like, if you can see as an actor or actress while you're sitting in bed reading, why would you, like, remember to lean over and, like, hold your book weird? Yeah.
Well, that's also one thing Winslet mentioned, is that, or it might have been the producer, but in their commentary, they said that if you're captured by the drama, you can look past the imperfections.
True.
And I think that's 100% true. I mean, hell, look at Braveheart. I still have a fun time when I watch it, just because it's a fun movie. It's just...
No, I completely agree, but it's one of those instances where, like, a lot of period dramas, the drama is the fun of it, right? And I think with Austen's work, what sets her, like, the retellings of her work apart are what made her popular in the first place. And it's the details in the everyday life that, well, for the most part, were completely lost without her works, right? Because no one's going to spend the time writing about a mundane thing, especially during, the 1800s.
Unless you're Tolkien or C.L. Lewis.
But both of them are later, when we had better photography, better recordings of the world, like, and there was more female-based things, which is usually where you, like, will see the home life. That's where you're going to see the details where, like, a historian's going to be very interested in what the dresses are looking like, what's the house routine look like. Where if you're writing for men by men, well, I'm not going to include that because I'm here for the epic, I'm here for the drama, I'm here for, the grand fight, I'm here for the Three Musketeers, essentially, right? Where you're going to get a sense of it, but you're not going to get that detail.
Unless you are Stanley Kubrick.
A modern man.
Barry, he did Barry Lyndon.
He did. But I think it's a more modern thing to be concerned with the details. I don't think it was not, like, the details in the mundane were not a thing that was necessarily embellished and published and looked at with reverence. That's why journals were so invaluable, right? Because they wrote about normal, everyday bullshit.
Today, I took the longest shit I have ever thought to have taken.
No, it sounds really dumb, but why and how people pooped is incredibly important to history.
Unfortunately, the chambermaid removed it before I could get out my measure.
The chambermaid might have removed it, but you also might have just dumped it into the street, onto someone's head.
Yeah.
Depending on where you lived.
Fun little bit of fecal facts with Nicho.
Okay, yes, a new corner.
I have held the world's largest Viking turd.
I'm so proud of you.
From Yorking, when I was in York, England, at their Viking Museum.
That's amazing that we have that.
It circulates online every now and then, and I'm like, I'm so proud I've held that. Of course, the case, but not...
well, sure, they don't want you to touch a historic, important artifact.
We're dealing with parasites, apparently.
That makes sense.
Also, what I was told, that turd was twice the length of what you see online, because when they removed it, the other half just crumbled away. So that turd was twice as long as what you think of it.
You know what? Whoever produced that should live in their afterlife proud to know that A, memorized forever, but also terribly large. Good for them. I hope they feel better from their parasite problem.
Yeah.
But no, it is, as gross and silly as it is, like, the stupid things of the day, especially the way Austen was able to romanticize, like, the everyday life, but with details that were pertinent and interesting, well, unless you're listening to the audiobook, and then what kind of jelly and butter they're putting on their scones is very dry. But it's those details that I think Lee managed to bring into this, where, like, he did not have to show the dogs being fucking everywhere. And, like, this one lady has them with her, and they're not, like, the cool dog, right? Because we've seen the cool dog. The cool dog's an Italian Greyhound. Well, that's the popular breed.
In the commentary they brought up, they don't know why, but at some point Lee just decided he wanted everyone to have some type of animal at one point or another. So it's just
he didn't get everyone, but he did get a lot of people. But they're country people. Why not have dogs? Like, breeding dogs was a popular hobby at the time, especially for men. The common, like, fancy quote-unquote dog for the time period was an Italian Greyhound.
Pigeons.
Or pigeons. Pigeons were another common one. More city-ish, I think. But, you do you. It's your hobby. I don't care. You're dead. So, like, having those little details and, like, not just in, like, the house is dingy and not well kept, the dresses are nice, the hair is well done, but, like, adding that little detail to, like, their country bumpkin relatives that are giving them this shitty house, even their hobby is lower class than, like, the nice people, because he has essentially just, like, slightly fancy mutts. Like, none of them are, like, nice looking. They're not even all the same type of dog.
Nope.
He just has an assortment of dogs. Whereas we know what the fancy dogs look like. That dog hasn't touched the ground ever in its life. It's been held the whole movie.
Yeah. But also going back to the detail of the house just a little bit.
I love it.
Is that this is the amount of detail, if you're not paying attention, I think you can easily miss. But you can still feel it, because as they're walking around the house, it's bleak. It's got like a little bit of a blue overtone, even though the walls are whitewashed.
Yep.
And even then, like, at night, it feels even colder.
You can like feel the draft through the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. And I think that's why this movie's also very rewatchable, Because, yes, the twists and turns the first time you watch it from the story, from the drama, and the romance is very appealing. It definitely, like, hooked my husband. That's, I think, the only reason he watched it. But if you like period dramas, part of the fun is the details of the period. And so, like, this is a great example of why this is so rewatchable, because you can then, like, sit there in the background and be like, oh, they, like, stuck a candle on the, like, ledge next to where the stairs go up. How smart, because they don't have night lights.
Yep.
So, like, the perfect place.
Yeah, no, I mean...
They don't have paintings on their walls, because paintings were expensive.
But, okay, so that's the thing, is, like, as the movie progresses and it becomes more so their home,
yes,
it becomes more and more decorated, and there's painting on the walls. It's still...
Yes.
The walls are colder, but it feels warmer and lived in. That's the main thing, it feels lived in.
And you can see, like... they're not even like, oh, they went up and picked a painting up from Target. It's like you can see as the movie progresses, the things the women are working on start to populate the homes.
Mm-hmm.
So like they slowly get a little bit more furniture, and the pillows will suddenly be a little bit nicer. Like maybe someone made those, or someone embroidered those.
Yep.
The paintings, maybe they did manage to get one secondhand, but some of them maybe someone painted that in the house when their free time.
Yeah, no, exactly. It just builds up the character of the movie as it progresses, and the
Yes.
character of the sets.
And it also really helps with the timeline, because this movie takes place over ages, but also no time passes whatsoever.
Yeah, honestly, it feels like it's maybe like a couple months.
It's really hard to tell, because again, we get really no sense of urgency. There's no music to kind of like help progress anything. You just kind of live in this perpetual state of old-timey England.
Well, we do get a little bit of...
The men have urgency.
No, there's still some little bit of time progression and
Sure.
put urgency from the relatives.
Sure.
Because, again, they're nosy and pushy.
They are, bless them.
But I like their line of, oh, there's no formalities here, which sets up how the countryside is supposed to feel in this.
Yes.
And we get the introduction to Colonel Brandon as he enters to Mary Ann playing piano. And we get a little bit of like kind of a cliff notes of he's adventurous or worldly, even though he seems like everything Mary Ann is supposed to like from what we know of.
Yes.
But there's just not that clicking there right away, because
at least not for her.
Yeah.
I think for him, Alan Rickman did a fantastic job of showing this like immediate attraction.
But it's because
The hesitance, though.
It's the hesitance because of what we find out later, and
True.
it's so subtly played.
But it's perfect.
Because the reason she doesn't like him is because he seems reserved.
Yes. No, when you first start this movie, you honestly think that you're, like I said, husband was fully invested, but he also, at the beginning, goes, oh, this is going to be one where the sisters switch love interests because they realize that this isn't how that works out. And I went, you wish it was that simple.
Oh, you fool.
You
You've
fool!
watched too many Adam Sandler
You don't
rom-coms.
know anything.
But also it shows the differences within the family themselves, because the mom, Mary Ann, and Eleanor have all been raised up super fancy.
Mm-hmm.
The littlest one,
Margaret,
and it brings up Edward, not fully saying his name.
No.
But,
she's trying to fit in. She's trying to be a little more mature.
But it backfires, and Eleanor gets pissy at him, and her response, we never talk about things, showing the restraint that everyone else is supposed to be holding.
Mm-hmm.
But
she's not used to it, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing, too. She's learning and developing, whereas the countryside relatives are very open about everything, and this family is kind of stuck in between that of like,
they're much more proper,
yes,
so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just like the clashing of social cultures.
But the thing that I think the movie almost remedies real quick is like you get this feeling from the relatives that they're too much. They're too invested in they're too nosy, they're too invested in getting the girls married immediately, they're too pushy. And then almost immediately the family members are like, what if we brought you on holiday with us? And it turns out to be like an incredibly nice gesture. Like it's not like, because you kind of have this like doubt in your mind of whether or not they really are good people.
Yeah, well, it's not even holiday. Like they bring them over for picnicking, which
very cute.
Trying to stir the feelings between Mary Ann and Colonel Brandon, which
there's like a little line in here where one of them goes, "Yeah, her daughter's a married woman. She's nothing better to do than marry off everyone else she knows."
Yeah,
and like honestly, especially we've now spent time in some of those slower moments of the movie where you're like, wow, these people would have been bored out of their minds. No wonder they spent so much time bothering other people.
Yeah, no, and I think this scene is very important, again, for the little bits we see of the male protagonist. Granted, we see more of Colonel Brandon than any of the other men in this movie.
Which, I'm not mad about.
But I also like that because he's so worldly, he is the most realistic and understanding of his position and situation.
Yes.
And even when we learn the backstory of why he went to the army and the poor love that passed away while he was
gone.
There,
yeah,
it is that kind of like sad moment of like, okay, you quickly understand why subtly he's hesitant, even though he's obviously awestruck by Marianne. He has that tendency to step back because even Jennings, their relative, is very much so like, I thought he'd fall in love with my daughter, but it was not meant to be. So it's like,
she's very like, but we haven't met her daughter yet. We will, and we know immediately it's a bad match.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the thing is like so much is so well put together in this movie, and I think that's why, honestly, I like of the male characters. While I like Hugh Grant as an actor,
I do too, but
Colonel Branton is the best in this entire movie, just because he is such. And I think it's probably because we do get more time with him.
Yes, but also I think this is a very star-studded movie,
yes.
And even though I hold all of these actors and actresses in very high regard, I think Alan Rickman really understood the assignment very well when he comes in. And he talks about his role in this movie much later on in his life in several interviews, because, I mean, for a lot of people, this was their either a big introduction for them later in life, down his career. Like, this was for a lot of people, this was like the big one for Alan Rickman in their minds, right? It's this and Snape for a lot of people.
Or Hans Gruber.
And so, like, this role, him standing out so strongly to people, I think does an amazing job because you already have in your head all these other roles he's played, and he manages to completely lose you into this, like, fantasy of him being, like, this very regal, very English man. And he knew that going in. He talks about it in the interviews where he talks about, like, yeah, we got direction to do this, and I normally as an actor would have chosen to, like, try and add a little twist here or there, try to, like, add a little snark or something, and I got shot down, and at first I thought, well, this isn't going to work at all. But then as we worked together through it, I realized that no, this character needs to be so reserved. But at the same time, our director eventually let me do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, we really had to, like, do some co-working on this, and I think you can tell, and I think it works very well.
Yeah, well, all that too. I mean, this is 2 years before Kate Winslet was in Titanic, so it's, I mean, it is a lot of these now famous actors who U.S. were relatively not there.
Yeah. Well, and, like, I think a lot of, especially for your American audiences, what eventually you got to see, it wasn't as readily accessible as it is now, where you, like, literally every broadcasting network, every streaming service has a large catalog of English movies and TV. At the time, it was a little bit more like, oh, this one person's finally, like, we're finally getting a movie, hooray. And, like, this was the most British of the British things to come over. So for a lot of people, this was, like, a big deal. Like, if you really liked this style of film, this was, like, a big thing to come out for you.
Yeah. Well, and back to the story just a little bit. I do think that even though he's not on screen a lot, there is something special with, like, Edward's romance too, where it's the simplest stuff where he is sending them messages still, showing that he's thinking of them, but also building up these expectations and continued disappointment that start as things start to fall through, and those disappointments start to mount. And the disappointments
turn to doubt so smoothly in this film. And part of it's because, even though we don't see Hugh Grant's character a ton, the way he portrays himself is so charming, so, like, you have no doubt of his, like, love interest in this movie. Even though later on, you're supposed to really doubt, like, well, did he ever really love her? Like, was he just playing this whole time? But every time he's on screen, you have no doubts. It's just when he's off screen that, like, well, maybe he really was being kind of a player, and I think it's truly just Hugh Grant's very genius way of handling this character, how very charming he was.
The awkward, charming, kind of geeky guy.
And they talk about how, like, he had a few moments where, like, the ladies on the screen weren't necessarily told that he was going to do something, like the flowers behind his back moment was a big one. And, like, that helped charm the actresses on top of it, so, like, there was a lot of very real charm interaction happening between everyone. And I think that helped play up the, like, how like, youthful he feels at times.
Yeah, just still proper, but still young.
More whimsy in some ways.
Yeah. But now we have the second tragedy of this movie.
Oh my goodness.
Where Marianne is hurt in the rain, but is saved by a dashing new love interest.
Oh my goodness.
John Willoughby.
Oh, Willoughby.
Yeah.
And this is the true love epitome needed, because now we have too many men to not enough ladies.
Yeah, because now it's the main drama of this act of the movie, because of course she's wowed by a man of action.
She is a romantic. She has Shakespeare by her bedside.
Oh yeah, I mean,
she is so over the top, and I love her. And
on top of that, according to the neighbor, he is rich, promising, and
very single,
needing to know.
Yes. Such an eligible bachelor.
Yeah, and like he does everything right, and he's
so storybook.
But that's also the sad thing too, because like you start to feel really bad for Colonel Brandon.
You do,
because he's so sweet, and honestly, Marianne becomes quite unlikable because she's a bit bitchy to him throughout the rest for a good chunk of this movie.
Yeah, and you feel bad for him.
Yeah, well, and also the male relative when he says, "Come, we know when we're not wanted."
Yeah, true.
But you gotta expect that. And here's why I think Brandon still stands out so much is because there's that respect for him, because he understands the situation and he takes a step back when he knows he is at a loss still, because he knows what's going on, and he's like, okay, I can't compete. I'm not gonna. It's the sensible thing not to get in the way or try and cause turbulence with these.
Ang Lee was quoted as calling Alan Rickman naturally a sweet man, and I think that's a huge reason why he was picked for this role, because you feel so bad because he is like, he's got this very like rough exterior. He's trying very hard to stand at a distance, but he is so sweet throughout this whole movie. He's very subtly sweet. He's
taking the slow approach because of his worldly experiences, whereas Willoughby's doing all the right things and
sweeping her off her feet.
Yeah, bringing wildflowers, reading poetry with passion, and being the pretty boy, while Brandon, we know he has this down the line, but he hasn't been given the opportunity to be that. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And I think it's so funny that a huge selling point for her on what she looks for in a man is the passion with which he can read Shakespeare. And I was trying to explain this to Brian. I was like, remember, Shakespeare would have been a very like big and well-known author at the time. It would have been the equivalent of being like, well, what's your favorite meme on YouTube? Mine's the cat that plays the piano. Yours is also the cat that plays the piano? A connection.
Favorite nerdy book? Dungeon Crawler Carl?
Exactly. No, it's the equivalent. Like, it was such a like easy answer. It's not like, oh, some underground author. It's not, oh, I'm reading this one because I'm trying to like. They both just constantly read Shakespeare because they love the idea of love and romance and like this big epic love, despite the fact that like neither one truly pursue anything.
Well, that's also of the time period. They're not meant to pursue; they're meant to be pursued. And
true.
I think that's honestly, and this is my opinion as a male, so take it with the grain of salt or whatever.
Yes.
But I think that's something because of not just Austen, but also this era of writing and how women tend to write romance of them being pursued by the man, is that's something that's kind of stuck around for a while, and why it's a little disappointing in modern romance, because Winslet goes on a little bit of a rant of how modern dating is missing all of that. It's like, well, that's kind of how it's kind of become, is you want to put it in equally, whereas back then the women really didn't have to do anything other than exist and the men pursued.
Well, and I think it's funny listening to Kate Winslet's interviews on this, because she regularly calls herself like a free and independent woman, and I'm like, good for you, honey. I'm so proud that you're here for the feminist movement in 1995. But it is very funny because both her and Emma Thompson, though I do think Emma spent a little bit more time really understanding the history behind Austen's works and like why they were written in this way.
Oh yeah, I mean she brings up so many little things that I didn't know about, of like they pinched their cheeks because that's what made it rosy.
Yep.
Because they didn't have the makeup back then.
Especially if you were low class, like you're not spending money on makeup, especially with a 500-pound budget. Yeah. You're just gonna put your cheeks and call it good. Maybe keep a little bit of like rouge somewhere in the house for very special occasions. And Kate Winslet's kind of on the other end, where like she kind of understands, but at the same time she regularly says stuff like, oh, I missed the pursuit, fully missing that her character early on talked about how like they can't do anything. They can't own anything. They can't get jobs anywhere. Like, how are you to pursue a man when you have nothing, my love?
Yeah, no, well, that was Thompson's character.
That is Thompson's character, but, I mean, Winslet, like, fully glosses over this
yeah.
in a lot of her interviews, and I find it, honestly, very charming, because, like, there is this duality between, I think, a lot of the actors and actresses, because Hugh Grant and Alan Rickman also had similar, like, back and forth of, like, one of them, honestly, a lot of time Alan would be like, yeah, it's a little dated for, like, being proper and all that, but, like, I guess, you know, the time period, it is a drama piece, it's a period piece, so, like, that's where we're going with. I think I would have updated it here and here, but they said no, whereas Hugh Grant in some of his interviews would be like, no, I really loved that we really leaned into the period pieces portion of this, and so it was very interesting to see, like, there's a lot of dualities happening on set, and I think they balanced out nicely, because updating Austen's pieces is a challenging thing to do well.
I can completely understand, because it's of its time.
Yeah, no, and that's why people like it.
But also, I think earlier on that disapproval of Edward was necessary to set up why she's falling so hard for Willoughby. And also, at the same time, Eleanor's disapproving of their fast pace of their love.
Yeah.
And also, Marianne is also insufferable to her siblings.
Very.
Like, if things aren't her way, it's the wrong way to do it.
Everyone is insufferable in some way, but the way that Ed is shot and the way that the the time you have between dialogue gives you enough time to, like, see everyone's point of view too. So you feel like, oh, well, yeah, but I can see the other side. So you feel like, as the audience member, you're not, like, being strung along in any way. You feel like you have time to pick a favorite character and, like, get on their side of an argument. And I think a lot of it comes down to, like, who you are as a person. Or, like, where you are. Because if you are a very romantic person, you totally lean to one sister's side. If you want to be a more practical person, husband, he went totally the other side. He's like, man, she's being so dramatic. And I was like, yeah, she's the passionate young sister. She's full of, like, this grand idea of what love should be, Brian. He's like, well, she's being impractical.
Well, and here's the thing is, like, we get a scene shortly after this, I think really sets it up. Well, in between that, I do like that it regrounds that they're still struggling by their own standards, where they're like, well, we can't afford beef. Well, then we'll starve. And
you're not going to starve. You're just not going to eat beef.
Yeah, Eleanor's the very sensible one of, like, yeah, we're just not going to eat beef. But at the same time, it gives us that pacing of those two being the sensible ones, whereas Marianne is off living her falling in love, giving a locket of her hair, doing non-societable
writing
norms,
notes in the middle of the night,
riding recklessly through the street or through the one road of the town.
Yes. And I think it's a great duality, because for some people you feel like the oldest sister's maybe a little stuck up and she's being a little bit harsh, and some people I feel like the youngest sister's being very reckless and careless, because it's brought up a couple of times, like, how well do you know this man, girl? And she's like, I know him so well. I'm like, no, you've read some Shakespeare quotes to each other. Calm down.
Well, and also, I think the way her character is, she is a very self-absorbed character. And that,
she is, but she's also young.
Yeah, but it's also seen in the picnic invitation with Brandon, where
she's so rude. It's
a sad rejection, but of course, I mean, that's the thing that makes Brandon's character so sympathetic. He's like, by the way, Willoughby's gonna be there. It's like, I'm not gonna not invite him.
I'm also inviting Willoughby. And she's like, hooray, Willoughby! And it's like, girl, can you pretend for like 5 seconds?
Yeah, well, it's also showing Brandon's attention to what's happening around him.
Yes,
even if he
very attentive.
But that's the same thing as, like, because we know his backstory and why he's sweeter on her.
Yeah,
is because even if he isn't the pick, he's helpful and courteous because he wants her to be happy.
Yeah, a very sweet sentiment.
Yeah, and I know someone might come across and say, "Oh, that's very white knightish," but it's really not, because I mean, Eleanor even reprimands that Brandon's, like, being kind to her, and he's like, or like, you're indulging in her wild fantasies and her spirit, and he's like, I used to know someone who was like that. And it's like that oh shit moment of, like, oh man, Brandon, I feel so bad for you at this point of, like, even though you can't be that guy, you're still trying to help it because you've been in the shitty situations and you don't want her, because Marianne is very naive and innocent to the way of the world.
And on top of that, it's a great setup for much later in the movie, because you still at this point feel like and the middle sister are not necessarily a good match. She's so romantic. She's so full of youth and like ready to do any adventure. She's looking for thrill.
Adventure awaits. Huzzah!
Yes, and she loves this idea of grand, like, oh, sweep me off my feet, rescue me from the rain, sort of love.
Kill the town rat in the first go.
Yeah, whereas from what we've seen, he feels so much more reserved, so much better suited to maybe the older sister.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when he's starting to, like, kind of lean into, like, well, I knew someone like that, and it broke my heart, and you're like, okay, maybe you are fun.
Yeah.
Maybe you are this big romantic. You just haven't let yourself be that. So it's this wonderful setup, because I think without this little build that we're allowed throughout the, like, dialogue portions, I think the ending would feel very strange.
Yeah, he's like that friend who seems really normal and then invites you over to watch Takashi Miike one day.
Yes, exactly. And not the more popular ones.
No. Look forward to that in the future, listeners. You'll...
I know, I will enjoy it. I just have to figure out how to watch these movies without my roommates and husband.
No, the next one is watchable by all.
Very good.
Yeah.
A joy for everyone, I'm sure.
But it's picnic day, and something is amiss as Eleanor is introduced to Lucy.
And we all collectively hated Lucy.
Yeah, but in a way, the way the story is written, we don't have time to linger on anything or this feeling because it's very short-lived. They're cut off as Brandon shows up and they're about to go on their great picnic as a writer comes in and, oh no, it's another one who has to go back to London.
And for those of you like my husband who looked at Lucy and you went, she looks really familiar.
Mm-hmm.
What's she in? It's Harry Potter. She's in Harry Potter. Specifically, she's Umbridge, which may or may not have ruined the character for Brian and I, because we took one look at her and went, I hate her. Which, granted, it ended up kind of working for this particular movie, but I also would like to applaud this actress because you, ma'am, have managed to create a character that I hate so much, specifically from the movie, that in other roles I instantly hate you.
See, I don't hate Lucy. That's the thing, I don't hate Lucy. I think Lucy's also a kind of victim of the time. If
Lucy had another actress's face, I would feel less hate and more, like, sadness, but also annoyance. Like, she is annoying. Mm-hmm. Not as much as her mother. Her mother's very annoying.
Yeah.
But, like, I would have been just slightly annoyed. I'm just saying that the actress who plays Lucy managed to create a character whose presence has tainted every other thing that she's in. And that's truly impressive.
It's like Adrian Brody screwing his creation in Splice. That's ruined him for my brother now.
And if you're looking at Lucy's mother and thinking, she looks kind of familiar. What else is she in? It's Harry Potter. She's the fat lady.
Yeah. But now we get a little bit more of the quote-unquote drama of the movie, because honestly, while this movie has drama, it's not, like, over-dramatized, because we get the little bit of Willoughby's dislike for Brandon, and he reveals his love for the cottage.
He's so awkward, but charming.
Mm-hmm. I mean, going as far to call on asking to call on Marianne tomorrow.
Very bold.
Yeah, but that's the movie, the romantic build. We know the pattern.
We do, but we don't know the twist.
Yep, it's heartbreak because the other love interest is now off to London.
Damn it, curses!
Yeah, and honestly, of the characters, I wouldn't call him an antagonist. He's just a wishy-washy shitbag.
Yes, and I tried to explain this to my husband because my husband felt only compassion for all these characters, minus the initial bitch, right? And I was like, no, he really, like, once he pulls his little stunt where we're all having our cry fest and won't talk to each other, I was like, wow, he's really, don't you feel this irk behind him? Mm-hmm. Don't you start to, like, kind of resent him? And my husband was like, no, there's clearly something happening because these are, like, again, the two dualities of personality. One of us has this resentment in their hearts towards people. And the other is, like, this romantic love person who, like, only sees the good. And so it was a wonderful, like, experiment of watching this movie with two very different people.
Yeah, well, and I think part of it, too, is, I think it's how you read his actions, because, honestly, you can see them as him letting his angry side out of, like, okay, he doesn't want to be questioned. He's a man. He doesn't have to answer for it.
This is true.
Whereas, like, I'm watching it and I'm suspicious too because his actions don't match the previous events.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, the house has returned to being bleak and cold again.
Yeah, granted, we haven't removed decorations from the house to make it bleak. It's solely done in lighting and, like, exterior weather. More being told to us as opposed to being shown. Mm-hmm. And it works really well because it really kind of dampens the mood when you're watching it. Well,
and we continue with that heartbreak and that mood of it because Lucy and Eleanor have their own, like, conversation aside from them, and they're very quiet, and she reveals that
she's engaged
to Edward.
Oh my god.
For 5 years.
But secretly, we can't tell a soul. And this is where I thought my husband was going to just kind of throw a fit. Mm-hmm. Because I was watching this, already knowing what happens. But also, I'm watching this now for, like, probably the 10th time.
Okay.
I've seen this movie several times, and I love it every time I watch it. And my husband has never seen it. He's never read the books. He has no idea. These twists and turns are fresh to his eyes and his heart. And so he does not understand the deceit yet. And he, in his very romantic way, much like the younger sister, went, we should tell the mom. And watching his frustration is one of the greatest joys of watching this movie. And I think it's part of the reason why people do rewatch it, is because there's so many angles to watch it from. Mm-hmm. Because I watched it being like, wow, that bitch is engaged to our man. And he went, oh, that bitch is engaged to our man, we must act!
That home-wrecking hussy, even though they're not even
though she's not, like, they're not engaged.
Yeah.
And it's one of those details that I think this movie does a great job of. They're very careful with the dialogue in this movie. Not just because it's a Jane Austen, because honestly, let's be real, a lot of the dialogue is very modernized. Mm-hmm. It has that old world feel, though I think a lot of that's just the actor and actress's, like, accent. But they've updated the language so that a modern audience can fucking get through this film. Because it's a lot.
Yeah.
They talk a lot less in the movie than they do in the books. It's a lot of yapping in the books.
Yeah, and that's why I couldn't get through it. It's so much just...
It's a lot. No, I get it. But, like, their updating of the dialogue is so well managed. Everyone is so precise with their wordage. So that way later on, when you get the question asked, well, did he tell you that he's engaged to you? Did he tell you that he loves you? And they can genuinely go back and be like, no, we didn't let that slip.
I'm just realizing I couldn't get through this, but I sent you and Brian a photo of one of the manga I'm reading. That's just a page of dick, penis, black anus.
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, he's learning English in that scene.
Well, you gotta start somewhere. And honestly, I think passion is the best place to start.
Yes, exactly. And passion leads to them planning to ambush the London party that supposedly Willoughby and Edward should be at.
I love this because, the way the dialogue works in this is technically no one errs in the dialogue. But the way that it's spoken, the way that it's worded, you as the audience are so strung along with the actors, with the characters, that you're like, of course the love interests are going to be there, and there to see us.
Yeah, and on top of that, Jennings promises they'll be married by Michaelmas, which did
you have to look up Michaelmas?
Yes, I did. For those who don't know, it's a Christian feast that takes place on September 29th in Western Christian traditions.
Yes, and it's largely not celebrated anymore. It's an old-timey holiday.
Exactly.
But again, this is old-timey people who had nothing better to do than hold parties.
Yeah, but I do appreciate that sticking to what I assume is probably from the text. Because any modern adaptation, you would think that, they'd just replace it with Christmas.
But this is better because this is an ambiguous holiday.
Yeah.
And it is a much closer holiday. So, like, we don't really get a proper timeline in the movie. The book, excruciating. Mm-hmm. We know down to the minute of what is happening, essentially. Not necessarily, but you get my point. We're very detailedly told when and what is happening. The movie gives you kind of like this illusion of time, like, oh, you'll be married by Nicholas. Oh, we're going to go to this party in a few weeks, right? Or next week, or he's going to call on you tomorrow. But you kind of never get, like, a sleep. You never really get, like, a rest. It's kind of perpetually day and evening.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of just, like, washes away time, but in the best way possible. Because, again, this is a period drama about romance and love, and what better way to live than in a perpetual twilight stage of love and heartache?
Yeah, I mean, that's... It builds that drama, and it just keeps the drama going to keep you involved.
And that's the pacing, because this movie is honestly really slow.
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing, because even though it's slow, like, London feels uneasy with anticipation for Marianne waiting to be called on, Jennings being like, oh, Edward might call on any time.
Oh, I feel so sorry for their butler. She's out here ringing him in the middle of the night to be like, can you give him this message? And he's got his wig on sideways. He's like, girl, go to bed, please.
But it's Brandon who comes to check on them, one, showing that he cares for them still, and he's involved in their lives.
A sweet gentleman.
But also, there's a line where he's checking on the romance between Marianne and Willoughby. And
oh, Willoughby.
You think it helps in thinking that it's true, but there's the delivery of the line, and I don't think anyone besides Alan Rickman could have delivered it this way.
No, he's perfect.
That may he endeavor to deserve her, and just the disdain and venom and certain gravity that makes
perfect.
The way he says he dislikes Willoughby makes Willoughby's dislike of him seem very superficial. Like there's there's that energy behind Rickman's way he says it, in the pacing of how he says it, and that honestly,
yes, and I honestly think this is the line that for a lot of women moved Alan Rickman from just a good actor to like a love actor. Like in their minds, like there's actors who like you crush on, right? Mm-hmm. And granted, Alan Rickman has a very distinct face, very Alan Rickman shaped, which is not necessarily the conventional attractive. He's very British, but it is this sort of line, is this sort of way that he can say it.
Harry Potter.
See, and
it's
it's the same thing. And I think for a lot of us, when we grew up with him as Snape, we didn't see it. And then you come to this movie and you get it, and you get why there is a weird cult following around Snape and being like in love with Snape. It's I think solely from this.
I like him as Metatron, and
I do too, but like I think until you see him in this role, that it really clicks why Alan Rickman has a fan base that is more than just him being an excellent actor and a fascinating person. It is truly like there is a way in the way that he manages to say a very mundane line that changes it.
Yeah, well, I also think it's because like his voice is also very different than what we hear.
Very distinct.
It's very nasally and forward compared to like what we would think of people talking with the back of their mouth. He
doesn't have necessarily a gravelly voice, but he has a depth to his voice, but it's projected through that Britishness, and so there's like this balance there that really has like an interest. And the way that he can like spin a sentence was perfect for this role, because who else could possibly play a love interest like this?
Or also play a very cynical alien from Galaxy Quest.
True. Very true.
Actor portraying an alien.
Thank you.
Yes. But it is party time. So rich and decadent, which I do like the slight comedy of like the youngest not...
She doesn't get to go.
Yeah, not making it worthwhile. And just
and like... I love the little quick line of, I'm almost 12.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Which, granted, in her defense, she is getting close to, like, a coming out party. Like, she would be slowly being brought out. And, like, if this is a party that's mostly friends and relatives, she probably could have gone. But her friend/relative is like, no, we're here to hook your sisters up. You can't mess this up.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have a big mouth.
Yeah, well, and also, like, with the party and it stopping so hard is because Marianne finds Willoughby and he's and giving her the cold shoulder.
Freaking screeching halt. Willoughby! And the party's like, eek, what?
Well, also, like, her asking to shake her hand, I guess from the commentary, that was something new for the times, because you didn't do that because it used to be a manly thing back in the day to show, hey, I don't have a weapon.
Men shook hands, ladies curtsied, and men bowed to ladies.
Yeah.
Yes. You didn't touch. 10 feet for Jesus.
Yeah, and also just him saying that, they're just country acquaintances, also, like...
So rude.
But it also brings that emotional beat of really making it heavy and depressing of like, he's not even going to acknowledge that they once knew each other. It's just like, oh, we're acquaintances.
From the country, which is the bumpkin part of town.
Exactly.
And this is the part of the movie where if you are into costuming, this is the peak of costuming. Because we get to see a mirage and a very well-tailored group of fairly accurate to the period pieces, along with different ways that they were styled, and the girls are in older style, which would have been very appropriate for the country, but modern London, like, you were constantly trying to be on top of it, up to date. It's a richer scene. You would have been trying to hit the latest fashions, whereas the country, no one really matters. It's fine. You can be a few years behind.
The Victorian keeping up with the Joneses, and I don't know when the Victorian era exactly was. So.
This is not Victorian.
Is it Elizabethan?
I can't remember. They all have silly names. I'm not gonna lie.
The Georgian era.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're not English history nerds.
I simply enjoy fashion greatly, but I don't know all the words and terms. However, I do love that there is an effort made in showing the different styles happening, like the girls' slippers versus other people's more laced and buttoned boots, the adornment of hats, feathers, headdresses, the way that the jewelry is worn. There's a clear distinction between who is the country friends coming to visit versus who lives in the city, even in background characters here. Not just our main trio, like. And I think this is where the costuming's good throughout the whole movie. Like, well, I don't really find issue with the costuming in this movie, but I think that it shines here in a way because we've already established how you can tell the different character types based off the hair, based off of like the rough kind of. Don't get me wrong, everyone's wearing a little bit of makeup because this is Hollywood-ish movie, right? But the way that, like, everyone is portrayed, how they dress themselves, like, the youngest is wild, she doesn't do much with her hair, she's a kid. But here you can really see how wealth plays a role, and it's solely in the costuming. And it's beautifully done.
And it is a Hollywood movie, by the way.
It is, okay, thank you.
Yeah. But also we have, I mean, that's one thing that's great about it, too, is that the level of detail they went into. Because, like, even Eleanor, when she comes here, she doesn't find Henry. She finds the other, Edward. And
I would like to quote my husband, the less handsome brother.
Yes. But even then, like, if you're not paying attention, you could, the other brother ends up dancing with Lucy, and so it's
Robert, I think.
Yeah, and so it's like these, like, little bits of detailing that they're like, okay, something's happening in the sidelines. Another little bit of detailing. They swore in this scene, and it saved them from a G rating.
Oh, aren't they so clever?
For a PG rating.
Which, okay, I get, because while from a ratings standpoint on paper, this is very tame, this would look really weird on the shelf next to other G movies. A PG-13 feels a little more appropriate. You at least would be able to find it in the shelving. Because remember, this would have come out during the height of, like, a blockbuster era, when things were shelved by rating system.
I don't remember. I just remember it being shelved by categories.
We had categories, but the categories were for things over PG-13.
Oh.
And then there was a different section for R. There was a little corner for the R.
Maybe that's why, because, like, I was always either in the kids section, or I remember looking at the horror movies a lot and not being allowed to rent them. In ours anyway, granted, we went to, like, 2 different ones, a Blockbuster and, like, one that was attached to a pizza joint. I think it was, like, a family movie. And so we had a wall for R. There was a back room that no one was allowed in. I know. There was the main floor, which was done by mostly genre and then alphabetical. And then there was the quote-unquote, kid corner. And everything G-rated just went automatically in there. And then, after that, if it was very clearly a kid movie with a PG-13, maybe it would make its way over there. Okay.
But half the time it didn't. Half the time you had to look for your kid movie in the main floor. And so you were like, I really hope my Shrek movie is findable amongst this other adult garbage.
Yeah. But I do appreciate, like, I do, even though Jennings is nosy after this party.
Everyone's nosy. I
do appreciate that she's really trying to fix it, and, like, you can still, even Eleanor is, like, a bit soured by all of this, and, like, she's doubly upset because, or triply upset, one, she couldn't see Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Two, her sister's been snubbed.
Yeah.
And then three, she's still having to deal with the fact that Edward's engaged.
And I think this scene, while really doubling down how annoying the country relatives are, it also, like, reinstates, like, she really does care. She really does want them to find love.
Yeah.
Granted, she'd like them to be married immediately, which is maybe a little annoying. But, like, she truly does want the best for them. Like, she isn't just some busy, like, I'm gonna be in your way because I have nothing better to do. She does really care. Also, we have skipped a very side minor character, but one that I am very fond of.
Oh, House.
House is in this movie.
Yeah, I don't know his actual name. I just know about his house.
It's okay.
I vaguely remembered hearing somewhere that he was in this movie at one point.
Yeah, and barely.
And I completely forgot about it until he shows up on screen, and it's like, oh shit, I forgot that he's English too.
In the film, there's Lucy Steele, the one who's engaged to our love interest, and, you know, the homewrecker. Her mother, who is the...
I'm sorry. I know I called her a homewrecker, but she is
she's really not.
She's not. She is a sweet, innocent girl
who doesn't even know that she's homewrecking.
No,
because she's not.
She's not. She's in love with Edward.
She truly thinks they have been secretly engaged for 5 years. Bless her sweet, stupid heart.
But they have been.
See, and that's the thing. That's where, like, my husband and I differ, because I am fully believing that, like, there has been some lying happening. Because if you are 5 years engaged, and you've only seen each other once a year for Christmas, but she's so invested. She's so believing that there is true love here. He's just waiting for the right moment for us to get married. Sort of nonsense. But he's over here being like, I'm in love with other people. And doesn't bother to be like, And I know people are going to bring up the scene. Well, he tried to explain his schooling in America. I don't think that's good enough.
No, there's more. There's more. We'll get to it because here's why he is such a great character and why it does matter that he did try telling and was very true to his word.
Sure. I think he's just a little bit of a fool.
Yeah, I know. I agree that they're all a little bit of fools.
But real quick, House plays Lucy's father, who hates her mother. They are not in a happy marriage, but the only one who seems to know that is Lucy's father.
I mean, that's how it is back in the day. You're married, there's no divorce. You're just stuck with whoever you married.
And the greatest example of, I think, Austen humor that this movie portrays is him holding his son, his new son, or grandson, not sure. And he's holding the baby at arm's length while the baby's wailing, and he's like, oh my god, stop, please. Where's the nanny? Give it back.
I mean, to be fair, that was what you did. Baby's crying. Nanny, come check on the baby. It's crying. It is penetrating my ears. I am trying to read my book.
And this is where, like, his wife is such a good character, because, like, yes, she's annoying as hell. Multiple characters mention that she doesn't shut up. But she does, like, when they are home, she does spend a lot of time doting on the baby. She does, like, they show her actively, like, being, like, the main one holding it when they're home. Mm-hmm. Granted, obviously she's not going to stop partying. She's a rich upper-crust person, you have to. But, like, when she's home, like, they do show, like, this is, like, she loves being the home mom. Mm-hmm. And he, unfortunately, just hates all of this.
Don't blame him.
And the greatest part is my husband looked over and he goes, do you think that man plays any other role than grumpy ass?
I don't know.
And I went through my mind and I was like, I know he does. I don't think I have seen him play another role. Because everything that I recognize him from, he's kind of a grumpy ass.
Yeah.
He's in a lot. It's just whether or not I remember that he's in it.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what else I might recognize him from.
He is one of the bad guys in live action 101 Dalmatians, which is my other big recognizing for him, because he's that with Mr. Weasley.
It has been so long since I've seen that.
I loved that movie because I had the computer video game, and I did play it on government-issued computers, and might have gotten my father given an email being like, you really need to not do that.
Wait, he's Mr. Little and Stuart Little?
Yes, he is.
Fuck. Alright.
Yeah, no, he's in a lot of stuff. It's just whether or not you remember he's in it.
I haven't seen Stuart Little probably since I was a kid either. So.
That was my husband's excuse as well. We'll have to rewatch it soon.
Yeah. But Marianne's breakdown is just, I mean, she's the one who's going to break down first because she's passionate.
Of course. She's such a sensitive soul.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a hard time because there's no promise and it's heartbreak for all of them. And
this is where the movie's so clever with, well, did he tell you that he loves you? She's like, technically, no.
Exactly. Technically, Edward didn't tell her about the engagement either.
He really didn't, which is where, granted, I'm not like a full Edward hater. I just think Edward needs to grow a backbone.
Well, it's like, these conversations, it could have been like a 10-minute thing.
We could have solved so much heartache if he'd been like, by the way, when I was much younger, I promised myself to a different person. I don't love her anymore.
Yeah.
I haven't loved her for years.
But instead it's like, oh, I must go to London now. You can't wait 10 minutes?
Really? And he's like, no, I must leave immediately.
Because otherwise we wouldn't have a movie, but...
Well, and also, like, that's kind of just the way of it, too. Like, I think it does add to his character. I think it makes him more interesting to not have a backbone in some instances. Because he's supposed to also be very passionate, right? Mm-hmm. And how embarrassing to be like, well, I was also passionate about this other person. It turned out not to be, like, the real thing, but, like, you are. You're definitely the real thing. And, like, that little doubt isn't necessarily the main focus of this movie. I've just seen this sucker a lot. And so I have time to, like, analyze all these characters and pick a favorite, like, potential husband.
It's like me and Ichi the Killer.
Yes! And, like, that, but that's the whole point and joy of an Austen work, is, A, the details, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a detail-oriented person, this is the genre for you. But also, like, if you want to watch something 800 times and, like, pick a favorite person to then, like, gang up on everyone else, period drama's your thing. That's the whole point.
No wonder you love murder mysteries so much.
Because a lot of them are period dramas. They're just usually in the 80s or 70s.
Yeah, and why I like Knives Out better.
No, that's the whole point, is like, there's a murder, but most of the time we're over here doing period drama shit.
Yeah. But I do also appreciate in this part, too, because they're going to Brandon for aid, because of the people that we've met so far, he's really the only male character that's a solid foundation to return to.
So consistent, and that's probably why he's my favorite and why I'm biased.
Yeah, well, same here. But like his spilling of the tea about Willoughby goes so hard because
it's such an impact.
But it's also like okay, so Willoughby really was a shithead, but like
But at the same time, you still kind of feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, because he's still carrying on with his his first love, where following what happened with her daughter, and
it's so sad.
Yeah, and even then,
so sad.
Well, and even then, like Willoughby's fleeing to the countryside to leave her with child, and it's like, you prick.
Yeah, no, an ass move for sure, but at the same time, like, it is a complicated move, and I think it's that sort of storytelling that, like, Austen, and why I'm glad there wasn't a ton of changes and updates. Like, they were minor. But why the main story stayed the same and why this movie ended up being so good is because they managed to keep that complexity. Because, yes, ass move, but there's so much gray area there. There's so much more emotion happening.
Yeah, and it's also they do a good job of tying everything together at the, or towards the end, too, because, like, even though he's like, I could, if none of this had happened, Willoughby would have proposed to Marianne that day.
Yes. Which, heart-wrenching to hear.
Mm-hmm. But you also feel sad for, like, Rickman and or not Rickman.
Well, you do.
Brandon as well. And then Edward's back in the picture, and Eleanor is so polite, so polite. But it also makes it entertainingly awkward for their first, like, meet together, because this is only the second time we've ever seen them on screen together.
True. But they're so in love.
But Marianne is so ignorant of everything else that's happened around.
I know.
But also, Eleanor hasn't had time to, like, confront Edward about it at all.
No one, despite having all the time in the world, no one has had any time to actually talk about any of this. Mm-hmm. But that's, again, the joy of an old-timey period drama, especially an English period drama. Because even if we didn't have all the time in the world, you can't just be talking about stuff because someone has to be in the room to make sure you don't smooch. Mm-hmm. Like, can't be saying this stuff in front of your mom. Look at her. She's got a funny hat on.
Yeah. And at the same time, I get this, after he leaves, they get the secret reveal to, or no. we get another scene where Lucy reveals to the sister-in-law about their secret marriage.
And gets beat to hell.
But what I like about...
out.
But what I like about this part 2 is it gives that slight inkling of hope when we've just had all despair up to here. Because even she is below Edward. And that's the whole thing, is like this whole prim and proper thing of everything is for Edward. Everyone else is below him. Like,
yes. And like, I also think that this kind of is a satisfying, well, especially if you're a multi-viewer watcher, because Lucy, despite not being like a bad character, she's a little annoying. And she's supposed to be like, she's essentially taken away the man of our girl.
Yeah.
And like, she's done nothing wrong, but at the same time she won't fucking shut up. She's kind of like pushed herself in when like clearly everyone's a little uncomfortable.
Well, and she also doesn't know that Eleanor's in love with Edward. Like, it's just something like, because they're not talking about it. And part of it is because Eleanor, and this is why I think they're such a good, like, it shows why Edward is such a good man and why Eleanor is so good to her as well, or perfect for her, is because they have those same morals. Yeah. Where he's kept this a secret. Lucy's the one who spills it to Eleanor.
Yes.
And Eleanor only breaks down after it's revealed through Jennings.
Yes, and where everyone else has learned.
Yeah, and she kept her side of the secret as well. So
they're both honorable.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like, this whole movie is mostly about keeping their pride.
Oh, which is the only thing they really have left. They have no money. They have no prospects in life, which you don't get because it's a quote from another movie. Another Jane Austen movie.
Is it Pride and Prejudice?
It is.
I had like 2 guesses. That or Emma.
I'm a burden on my family. I have no prospects.
I think I vaguely remember hearing
for a hot minute. I think she says her age as well. I think she says, I'm 31. I have no prospects. I'm a burden on my family. And for a while, that was like a popular thing to get on your birthday cake, was that checklist.
Oh God.
Which I thought was hilarious. But the other like satisfying moment in this scene is you kind of feel like this final completion and satisfaction, because Lucy has spent so much time unwittingly telling us about how amazing this ass of a woman was. And how like, well, she's nice to me. She's so sweet. And like, everyone is being so polite and trying to like hold their tongue and be like, well, maybe she is really nice to you. She wasn't mean, but like, I'm not going to spoil that for you. I want you to be happy. I have my own pride and dignity. I can be the better person here. And so when Lucy finally does fuck up on her own account and then gets thrown out, and we are proven that this woman is in fact the worst.
Yes.
There's an inkling of evil joy, right? Because you're proven that this woman, who we've been told multiple times, oh, but she was nice to me. Oh, she was so sweet. She's so kind. Is in fact terrible.
But also here's where the writing's really good with that too, is Edward never breaks his promise.
He never technically does.
And neither does Eleanor. So it's the 2 people who never technically break their promise.
Yes. They're so pride.
And Lucy's the one who screws it up.
Yes. And it's also like a little bit of like another evil joy of like, well, Lucy messed it up, but technically no one breaks their promise. She's just fallen for another man. And it's, when you've watched this for the 8th time, it is a wonderful reflection on stagnation and how she has been so caught up in this false love, because they've only seen each other once a year. She's essentially 5 times.
Yeah.
Once a year at Christmas for the big family party, and then they've kind of written, and it's very well implied in the movie, that Lucy, much like the sister, is writing love letters left and right, and maybe he's not responding a whole lot. Maybe he sends like a, yep.
Well,
okay.
She's very much like Marianne as a character, where she seems to be in the moment. We'll get into where we find that too. But I also do love, like, after all this, Eleanor is able to break through, and then they still go to Brandon as the confidant.
Because he's the rock. He's the solid character.
Yeah, and he's the one who understands the suffering, because we learned that Edward's going to get thrown out of the house. He's not going to get an inheritance. And Brandon's like, well, I understand the plight of 2 lovers and the 2 who want to be together, but society keeps them apart.
Proving that he's a romantic at heart.
Yeah, but I just happen to have a small parish that I could give away to them.
Oh, to be rich and royal. And okay, I know that this movie makes it, the book makes it painfully obvious the hardship of, like, losing how much status and privilege they had, but also the money.
Mm-hmm.
This scene, I think, really helps solidify it, because they would have been his equal, like, status-wise and money-wise, until they lost everything.
Yep.
And he's just over here with a spare church that he's like, well, I had a guy filling in, but he wants to retire. Would you like to take it over?
Yeah.
I'll pay you for the rest of your life, essentially, to preach. I've heard that you feel like being a clergyman.
Yeah, well, it's also to show he's a good guy, and also he's giving... He's giving Eleanor the chance to see Edward basically one last time and to hear it from someone who truly cares for him.
And this is also, like, a really great scene of, like, redoubling down that even though he is the rock and the stable one and the very sensible one, he is incredibly romantic, incredibly passionate in life, where he has this, like, idea of, like, well, this poor love, they can't be together, what tragedy. I shall give you a parish of your own. It won't be glamorous, but you'll be happy. Yeah. And, like, I think it later on, especially if you're a rewatcher, I think it just kind of proves the final decision of who gets who. Mm-hmm. Because up until, like, I think if you're not paying attention to those details, you can still feel that, like, oh, well, he's just the rock, he's the more sensible one. He should go with the sensible sister still. They've had many interactions now.
Well, but that's the thing is, like, I don't agree with that, because even though he's the sensible one, there is still that underlying, like, he still has that, it's a reserved nature, but there's still that fire burning from within him, and that's why, like, he's still investing in these people who
he barely knows, really.
Yeah, exactly, and it's because of the passion for that young love that he wants to keep it going.
100%. And I will argue that the duality of him is the perfect balance for the young and maybe a little impulsiveness of the middle sister.
Yeah, no, exactly. But also there's a very, when we do get to meet Edward again, I think
Edward.
It's such a stiff scene, but it's so well done, because she does a fantastic job of not showing her feelings and letting him, like, just tell him the good news before allowing him to continue, like, with the conversation.
This breakdown is some of the best acting, I think, of all time. And one of the reasons why this movie won many, many awards. Yeah. Some of which for Best Actress.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I completely see it. But, like, even then, like, Hugh Grant, when he delivers the line, "Your friendship has been the most important of my life. You will all," in her response, "You will always have it." It's just
it's painful. It hurts.
It's the mutual understanding and the sadness and not saying what they really want to say that I think really drives the scene.
It's so perfect.
And there's the comedy that comes right after this, because that's the thing is, like, even after all these, like, the heavy, like, last 30 minutes of this movie, Jennings is still being nosy, and there's that little comedy of you can hear her the whole way home. That's through the entire montage of them getting back home. They even comment, "I don't think she shut up."
Yeah, I love it.
And of course we get okay, so here's the thing. I do like the part where Marianne walks to the rain. It's a really cool shot.
It's beautiful.
And it feels like kind of like, it's almost like that suicide march to, like, she doesn't plan on coming back because she's so heartbroken. The passion is so strong.
She has to see at least the location one more time.
Yeah.
It's that overly romantic, like, idealism.
Oh, yeah. And she's rescued by Brandon now, the one who should have done it the first time around, and it would have worked, but...
Oh, it's such a touching scene, and also... There's such a great little detail where much, much earlier they talk about how far this walk is, because she talks like, "Oh, I'm just going to be in the gardens." And because we have such a poor sense of time in this movie, which I like, don't get me wrong, them having that little slip earlier where it's like, "Oh, they're practically in our backyard. They're only like a mile or two," and the husband, the grumpy Mr. House, being like, "No, it's 5.5 miles." Really? It feels so much closer. No, it's 5.5 miles. Yeah. And to know that she's walked 5.5 there, she has to walk another 5.5 back in the freezing rain in what's probably a satin dress. And granted, I know there's a couple of interviews with Kate Winslet talking about, like, how sexual the time period was and how, like, these dresses were practically see-through. They were compared to other time periods. But I think
lots of tits, like
a
lots of tits, lots of cleavage,
a lot of cleavage because it wasn't improper at the time.
Because we got to be sensible with it. We can't show it all. We just have to show enough to get the interest.
Well, because breasts weren't sexualized at the time. We had gone from very unsexualized breast, kind of a little bit. There's in fashion anyway. There's a cycle of very Puritan and very and very allowed, right?
Yeah.
Where like there was a time period before this where your entire tit could be out in court and it would be fine. Yeah. Nobody would give a care.
Because I was just gonna say, I guarantee you, in the 1700s, there were still tit and ass men.
Of course,
there were ankle men. There were feet men.
There's always going to be feet men. There will always be feet men. There will always be, under boob men. There, like, you pick a body part, there's a person for you. Just saying. That's always going to be a thing. But socially, what's, like, common and also, like, culturally, what's, like, acceptable is, like, well, that's not really sexual. You can find it sexy. But you can find it sexy in the same way that someone in a bathing suit is sexy. Like, it's not wrong to wear it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, before the time period before this one was a little bit more prude, but the one before that, nobody gave a care. You gave a whole tit out. Nobody gave a shit. And so, like, this one, the time period, what would have been appropriate, like, having all of the tatas out, not a big deal. Granted, you nipples covered, obviously.
Yeah.
What is not appropriate would have been legs. We do not show the legs. That would have been no. Arms, feel free. Put them all out there.
But how, an ankle? Unconceivable.
Above ankle. Because we were wearing slippers at this time period.
Okay.
A lot of silk stockings, a lot of slippers. You're going to see an ankle, probably. But a leg, heaven forbid.
A calf, how dare.
How dare.
Scandalous.
Very. And so I do love, like, especially this scene, I think really, like, it gave some impression to some of the actresses working on, like, how sexualized this time period was. All time periods are sexualized, my love.
Oh, yeah.
That's just how humans are. But I think this rain scene, they did modernize a little bit to, like, really emphasize the, like, passion, give that romantic idea to it. And I think it kind of bled through to some of the understanding of the time period. And I love that. I think it's great. I think, like, that type of modernization is perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, I mean, it does give Brandon his time to shine, but...
It sure does.
Honestly, here's the thing. Don't get me wrong, I like this movie. Mm-hmm. But I've had to rewatch this like 4 times now because I hadn't seen it the first time around.
Sure.
This last bit of drama and the worrying about the cold.
Yes.
This is so goddamn slow. I don't care anymore because because I know she's gonna live. If she died, it would have been a dumb, meaningless death. And, like, people complain about Lord of the Rings having too many endings. Yeah. It's just like it's such a slow part. It's like, okay, we get Brandon saved her. Now it's his chance to read poetry to her.
It's their bonding moments.
And it's also the whole, I have to go to London.
Well, he goes to get her mother.
Well, they do, but it says you won't stay away long, showing that she's waiting for him around.
They truly have connected.
Yeah, first man to say that he's coming back from London,
and actually do it.
But it's just slow and boring because it's honestly like 20 minutes of this shit.
It is,
and it's just like we learned the news of Ferris's marriage, which we knew that was going to happen.
But there is a twist still.
Yeah, I know I'm getting to it. And also Brandon, being the nice guy he is, buying them a piano because he's so sweet.
He is. He's the best. He's the top character.
And that part is such a slog that I hate that part of that movie. So I know it's necessary, but it's so goddamn boring because we've seen this and I know it's for Brandon, but...
It's for Brandon, but also it's for the family structure. Mm-hmm. Because we, at the beginning, saw how tightly knit the mother and daughters were. And then when we move, there's some tension. There's a lot of tension later on. The girls both have their love interest / horror of like, neither one of us actually have a love interest. And there's such a big gap between them to each other, the older sisters. Our littlest sister almost becomes non-existent for a hot second. Oh,
she's like in like 4 or 5 scenes of this entire movie.
And then their mother, which granted... is their head figure, and clearly they were both very attached to and very, like, fond of in the beginning of the movie. This whole section, while I agree, it is very long and drawn out, it's not just to build their relationship with Brandon, though that is probably the most important reason. It's also to reestablish them as a family unit, to, like, give them a better base, a better foundation for the new relationships we're about to, like, announce are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they had just gone from heartache to straight on, like, oh, never mind, you do get the man you want, well, then that relationship feels like it's standing in a sea by itself, as opposed to being a welcomed addition to an established family.
Yeah.
And so I agree. It is a very long scene, but I do think it's a necessary scene.
No, and that's the same thing. Is because I think part of it is because we've gone through so much of this drama.
And you're ready for it to be done.
Yeah, no, it slows down, and like even... But it does pick up just slightly towards the end when Edward shows up. Which,
Edward.
And here's the thing too. I like that they're still getting dolled up, even though they know he's technically supposed to be married.
They are still fond of him.
This is now the cottage feels warm and lived in.
Yes, everything. And I love that he eventually sits on one of their sewing hoops. That's very funny, very cute.
Yeah, and it's that big reveal of, oh, you must have mixed it up, because they have the same last name. They don't refer to them by their first name, so it's like
a very good little, like, nod to how the confusion could be.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, the sister or the ex-fiancé now married the brother because we saw them at the dance together. So it's like that nice little, like, detailing that's finally coming through. Also, we forgot to bring it up. They have a treehouse now. Well, this is the first time
they built a new treehouse.
Yeah, we see the new treehouse because it was such a big part of their old house.
Which is very cute, very whimsical, really showing off how independent they are.
Well, it's not showing that they're independent. It's showing that they've made the country their home.
They really have.
They've come home to stay.
Well, and I think, I know the movie doesn't spend a lot of time with the youngest daughter, and that's honestly for good reason. We've only got 2 hours, which some people would argue is a bit long. I do think it's a really nice, like, small detail to re-bring the youngest back in, because she's a little bit more important in the book, especially because, like, the age gaps between the girls are much smaller. So, like, the oldest daughter's stories really is about to be paralleled in the youngest, because she's about to be that age where, like, this is going to be her problem again soon.
Yeah.
And, like, she's still young. She still has this wonderful imagination. She doesn't understand how love works yet. She just is copying her sisters. And, like, we don't have time for that in this movie. But we do have time to, like, remind you that she, like, is a big part of their lives by showing that they have a very fancy new treehouse, which is honestly really dope looking.
She's the one who's able to speak with them because she's the one telling them what's happening in the window. They're not supposed to be being nosy, but they're being window watchers through the little girl, even though they're right there.
Yes.
Yeah. But we do get our happy ending that's totally not a double wedding, according to Winslet.
Yeah, sure, whatever. It's a double wedding, and I stand by that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they would have been married for a while at this point. It's like, you don't even show that or, like, make any indication that this is supposed to be a singular wedding.
And granted, I understand if you read the book and you're, like, a book diehard, how you can be like, no, she's just a bridesmaid in the wedding. I don't care. In this movie, this is a double wedding, and it's the perfect double wedding. They get their big romantic, like, you know, she's all dressed up, he's all done up in his colonel outfit, and then the 2 more sensible ones have a much smaller, more realistic, she's not bought a fancy dress, she's bought a nice dress she can wear again. It's wildflowers in her hands instead of things from the hothouse.
Yep.
Like, I understand if you're a book diehard and how, like, you can reinterpret it. I don't care. In this movie, it's a double wedding and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I think this movie's interesting because I guess at the time there was a Austen revival that Winslow wasn't aware of when they were asked to do it. Because I guess
this was like a big thing at the time.
When they started filming, there was like 2 other movies filming at the same time.
There sure was, yeah. And granted, not just period pieces, which those are a regular, like, resurgence. Right now, I think we're seeing a big resurgence in very specifically, like, Chinese period dramas. English dramas will have their time again soon. I give it 5 years. But Austen specifically, Austen works about every 10 years. There's a big resurgence and interest in it. And we just missed one, right? We just had a big wave of a bunch of stuff coming for TV mostly, because we're currently in the streaming era. A lot of stuff that's technically quote-unquote TV, but it's just really long movies broken up into episodes for, like, Netflix.
Yeah.
And so, like, I foresee we will get more Austen works, give it 5-10 years.
Yeah, well, I wonder why that is, because, I mean, we've talked about Winslet talking about how the romance in this movie, no one does this anymore. And I mean,
they do, though. Yeah. They do. It's just, this group was so unique in how passionate they were, how well, like, what great actors they were, what amazing luck they got getting Lee to be the director and Thompson to do screenplay work on this and Lindsay Doran to be able to do producing on this. Like, they were very lucky to have this group of people who managed to fit the time period, who managed to have all this extra people, who had Jenny Breven and John Bright do costuming, some of the greatest names in the industry for historic period timepieces. Like, they managed to get people together that I don't think we will ever see again. And that's okay. The new Emma was fun, and I loved it. Is it the best representation? No. The new Bridgerton was amazing, and I loved it. Is it the best representation? No, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because occasionally having a more modern version will eventually be the next generation's, like, comfort, like, period drama, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's also partially because, like we said, movies, we want to see the happy stuff. We want to see the ups and downs, but not, like, fully go through them ourselves.
Sure.
Because it adds some excitement to, as a contrast to the mundane that we have to go through with the day-to-day life of just surviving. And
sure.
I think it's an interesting... I do think that these kind of traditional resurgences are interesting compared to, like, what we have some perception of what modern dating is of, oh, I want to be a free, independent woman. I don't want to have any of this attachment. But some women also still want to be pursued the same way that this movie portrays it. And it's just like...
And I think a lot of it for period dramas, and it depends, like, and I think it's the same for all period dramas, but the rules change depending on what time, is there is a wonderful set of rules that go with a time period that even if in real life they might have been skewed or different depending on social rank or money or, honestly, reality, it doesn't matter, because for a story, like, especially for a genre, having a set of rules that governs it makes it more fun. Because it's more creativity to break those rules, or to change them, or to try and fit your story within them. And I think that's why period dramas are usually more people are more interested in rewatching and calling those their, like, main comfort, as opposed to just a romance.
Yeah.
Or just, a love story. Having those extra rules around, like, conduct and dress and society norms, yeah, a little stupid, not very realistic to nowadays time period, but those extra rules add a challenge and a defined network that you have to have that story happen in.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. One other thing that I think was interesting about, like, the release of this movie, yeah, it's won a lot of awards from what I know of.
It sure has.
But I guess during the production, Britain was kind of turning their nose up at it because it was a costume piece. Thompson wrote it, but it would be a Hollywood depiction of Britain, and it was a Taiwanese director. So
yes,
I mean,
there was a lot of unknowns for this.
Yeah.
And remember, this was Emma's first, like, big writing thing. So there wasn't a lot of, like, oh, like, they knew she was a great actress, but there wasn't that backing yet to, like, prove that she could also write the screenplay well. She had written some stuff, I think mostly for TV before this, but this was, like, a big first step for her writing-wise.
Yeah, I didn't even look up what she had done previously. Yeah, mostly
TV.
TV first. This was her first feature film. And, I guess she did additional dialogue for 10 years later for Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, which I recommend watching. We won't do a deep dive on it because we've already covered Austen, but I do recommend it. It's very good.
Okay. So, Chris, at the end of Sense and Sensibility, what rating do you give this movie?
This movie's a good. This is one of my comfort ones, and I say that as someone who's not normally a romance lover. I love a period drama. I love the messiness, but I'm not usually, like, a love story person. Sense and Sensibilities is different for me. This movie's so good, and I enjoy watching it every time.
Yeah, I'm definitely giving it a solid good, even though I bitch about the part of the ending of it.
Sure.
But I think it does such a great job of just doing a solid romance story without being overly dramatic. Everyone feels relatable, and also it's very down to earth. It's not like some of those period drama pieces that you see, and granted, I've only seen clips of them, where, like, people are flying into a rage, and it's like, no.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, this is, outside of the mom going into the rage and beating Lucy, like, the rest of the movie is very... Sensible. Yeah, exactly.
And that's the joy of Austen, really. It truly is.
And, I mean, it does make me curious about some of her other stuff, but it's not going to be, like, the first stuff I go to.
And I totally get it. I understand that Jane Austen's works, both written and movie format, are not for everyone as far as like an everyday watch sort of thing. I get it. This is not going to be everyone's first grab. However, this is something you need to watch. Pick one of the Jane Austens, figure out which one is considered like a best go by. There's been a lot of iterations, and depending on what you value, that's going to be the version you watch. For some people, it's the more recent Emma. For some people, it's a very specific BBC edition of Pride and Prejudice. For me, it's the 1995 Sense and Sensibilities. Pick one. Watch it at least once so that way you get it. Because, yeah, it's a little girly. Yeah, some people, it gets a little silly, but there's a reason it's a classic.
Well, that's something I think is like... I know Winslet went on a whole rant about boy and girl movies, but that's the thing is I don't see this as a boy movie or a girl movie. It's just a solid movie, and it's like it took a boring book that I couldn't get more than an hour into, and turned it into something interesting and entertaining that I want to see more of the adaptations. I don't necessarily want to go and read Austen, but I at least want to see what else she's contributed to the movie.
Absolutely. No, there's a reason that Austen is a classic writer, and there's a reason her books keep being made into movies. And it's not just because silly girls like them. It's because they truly are classical works.
Mm-hmm. So do you recommend this one?
With my whole chest. This one is one of my favorites, like I said. Is this like the epitome of the best iteration of an Austen work? I totally get it if your opinion is no. For me it is, and part of that is the cast, part of it is the director, and part of it is the costuming. I'm a huge costume nerd. I love looking at the like background pieces. I love researching this time period because honestly, to me, this is one of the uglier timepieces. I think this silhouette is very unflattering, and yet, they made it look so natural and so like realistic and lived in this movie that it's so much fun to research.
Yeah, I would say it is sensible to go and watch this. I can understand if it's just not your thing, but I do recommend at least giving this at least once a watch.
You probably will be surprised. My husband literally thought he was not going to enjoy a minute of this, and I think he's totally hooked. Yep. So,
Season 6 bingo. New season and new game. Well, almost end of a season now.
True.
Chris and I are playing bingo, and you can too. Rules for players are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. The cards can be found on our socials at tgtbtw_podcast on Instagram and Threads, and tgtbtw podcast on Twitter. You're free to email us the request at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. You can use any of the 3 bingo card variations, but each stamp must be associated with a Season 6 episode, whether that's Microview, Spotlight, or Deep Dive. Second place gets to choose a deep dive on 1 microview and 1 microview. Third place gets to choose 2 microviews, and 4th and 5th place get to choose a microview. So feel free to share at us on social media or email us to participate. Rules are slightly different for Chris and myself. We'll only get 2 cards per deep dive. We've already got all of our bingo for next year planned, so...
We've already technically won, but now we're playing for fun.
Yes.
And I will be going with my first one on the good card, with movie is actually historically accurate, because even though we did change some stuff, I feel like this one, pretty solid representation. And for my other one, I will be going with Chris is icked out by a character, solely because, again, a woman managed to portray a villain so well that I have hated everything else she's in solely because of that other character in that other movie she's in.
Okay. I'm going to go with my bad card.
Okay.
For butt stuff, because we talked about poop.
We did manage to somehow, in a very historically accurate and prim and proper movie, talk about butt stuff.
I'm very excited about that. And on my bad card, I'm going to go with a clearly avoidable obstacle of an extra 10 minutes to explain yourself. Would have saved a lot of heartache.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, it is one of the main frustrations of that character, but also why we love him.
Yeah, but... Yeah, we finally did a romantic movie, even though we did Notting Hill earlier this year.
A true romance for the Valentine-esque era.
Yeah, but we do have a couple more in store. I'm looking forward to our boy movie Valentine's Day special that I guarantee definitely has more in-depth female characters.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So. But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or tgtbtw for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace!